Welcome to the show, Kathleen Estrick, partner at Pair VC, and we're for a real treat here at VC Roundtable AI native network effects and defensibility. Snowflake, NFX, Redpoint Ventures, and Scale Venture Partners. Wow. Welcome to the show. How are you doing?
Good. How are you doing?
Super excited for this.
Likewise. Should be fun. Hopefully controversial.
Let's
That's
do
my
it.
ask to the panelists. Cool. Thanks so much, everyone, for joining. I'm Kathleen. I'm a partner at Pair VC. We're an early stage fund focusing on pre-seed and seed investing. As a generalist fund, on the pre-seed side, we run an accelerator called PairX, which applications are open for through October 8th for the next cohort. And then on the seed side, we lead or co-lead rounds. I'm super excited to have these panelists with us today. Today, we're going to talk about defensibility in AI and how you kind of think about moats, particularly from a VC perspective. Before we dive in, I think it'd be great for everyone to give a very quick intro, and maybe as part of your intro, give your definition of defensibility in this AI native world. So Jeremy, you want to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Kathleen. I'm Jeremy Kaufman, I'm partner at Scale Venture Partners, focused on Series A and B and vertical AI and application level AI companies. I my word would probably be future workflows.
Mm-hmm. Cool. Valerie, do you want to go?
Yeah, I'll go. Hi, everyone. I'm Valerie. I'm with NFX. We're a generous seed fund. NFX does technically stand for network effects. So as we talk about effects, that is where we work on. In defensibility in AI, I really think it is like how your ability to maintain a sustained competitive advantage through either your data, your talent, your model architectures that people can't actually just come in and replicate today. It's maybe long term, but I think it's more that sustained competitive advantage. You're always at least a half or one step ahead of others.
Cool. Either Madan or Jacob.
I can go next. Hello, everyone. My name is Madan. I run our field engineering organizations for Snowflake. I work with customers small and large across all the industries. And to your question, I would say, Kathleen, establishing some predictability on margin creation with AI, that would be what would, create more defensibility.
Awesome. And I'm Jacob. I'm a managing director over at Redpoint, lead a lot of our AI app investing. And, I think of defensibility as things you can build when you get to kind of scale and ubiquity within organizations, but really the first chapter being a race to get to that.
Awesome. Excited to have you all here and dive into this, I think, pretty timely topic. I would say, I guess my first question is maybe each of you can walk through maybe a recent company that you either invested in or saw that had what you would consider some sort of moat or defensibility that got you excited enough to potentially write a check. So maybe walk through kind of how you thought about that from an investment lens, and or for Madan, I know at Snowflake you guys see a bunch of companies, so would love to hear kind of how you think about that as well. So a company that you recently underwrote and the moat or defensibility that they had that got you excited enough to invest. Anyone want to go first?
I'm happy to go. So we have a company, maybe one we've announced recently. It's called Neon Health, and it's doing sort of a vertical sort of AI automation platform in the pharmaceutical services industry. And I think for us, where we see on the moat here, it is combining a lot of the next gen technology of sort of voice AI and sort of how you're thinking about like scaling those operations. But I think how they're getting defensibility is really their go-to-market. They have a team of really deep experts and connections sort of within that pharmaceutical industry. And I do think in some ways, I think in some of these vertical AIs, maybe a hot take or not, there's always like probably going to be 20 or 30 of them always. And I do think that first mover advantage is probably even more important now because a lot of people are going to be able to have 10x or 20x better product. And I think for them, they really found that sort of wedge just really at the beginning of when the real developments kind of back in October last year happened in voice AI, really going after a market that's really large. And then for them in this industry, really showing how they can really accelerate the revenue sales. And now that becomes quickly that go-to platform. So I think both there's more market to grab, but also like you got to grab it straight away. Otherwise, you're never going to be able to grab onto it again.
On that note, do you think that first mover is sustainable? Like, how do you think of the fast follow? To your point, like there's 50 companies in every category at this point. So if you see something that maybe already has that first mover, you're evaluating that. Do you like how defensible long term is that, or do they need to use that to then compound other things?
I think good question. I think to me, at least how I'm seeing it, it really depends on the industry. I would say that certain industries where I feel, example, like law, where I do think Harvey actually, I think you actually have an almost better advantage being a second mover here because they've done a lot of the legwork of kind of overcoming this like old industry who would like never buy AI and then like deal with that and the timeline to that. Whereas now, because I've kind of done a lot of the legwork and gone there now, like it opens up a lot of other applications. And maybe that means you're not going on corporate counsel or external counsel, but maybe you go in-house counsel, juries or litigators or all of that. But I think it's sort of being a follow there is really helpful because, and I think I see this in the financial services industry as well, being a first mover can be really hard because you get bogged down in the bureaucracy and then following in those, more regulated industries. Others have already opened the door for you and you can, especially from having rapid growth aligned with VC incentives of where you want to go, you're going to be able to hit that quicker because you're not going to spend 3 years. You're less likely to spend 3 years in a bureaucracy triangle.
Yeah, I would tend to agree on the legal tech front. I've been pretty excited in diving in there, and it's like Harvey paved the way, and now there's so much greenfield because folks are already adopting at least that, and they're ready for some more purpose-built tools in combination. Jacob, do you have one in mind?
Yeah, no, I recently led an investment in a company called Augment in the AI logistics space. And I think that's an example where just a really unique kind of founding team, right? Someone that in the CEO, Harish, and one of his co-founders, Justin, had just lived in the logistics industry for the last like 15, 20 years. And so I think as you think about lots of people going after this problem, just really deep understanding of like what the needs are within that space, then married with like a really strong AI team. And so I think a lot about, in some of these crowded spaces, just finding a really unique team that you can back. And over time, you're kind of betting on that team to continue to compound and ship quickly and discover these problems. But ultimately, starting with that, I think is really helpful.
How do you think about the deep domain expertise versus these sort of like AI native founders in their early 20s who kind of just, come into these industries? Like, do you or Redpoint have kind of a perspective around, either of those profiles?
Yeah. I mean, I've invested in both, and I think I have immense respect for both profiles, I guess. I think the strong part about the people that are really deep in an industry is obviously both knowing out of the gate what the right things to build are, but then I think also once you get to some level of scale, knowing what like the act 2, act 3s, act 4s, and having that kind of coherent vision from the beginning and being able to meet with the CEOs of the largest enterprises in that space and bring them on that journey. But obviously, so much of I think the topic of this panel is defensibility. I'd say like I think there's very little defensibility in these early innings of AI, and so much of what is defensible today is just velocity, right? And shipping really fast, and ultimately these spaces can be learned, and customers, I think uniquely in this AI era, are willing to invite people in to talk to the CEOs of large banks and law firms and hospitals in ways that in the past maybe only the domain experts would have been able to do. And so I guess maybe an unfair cop out to your question, but I think both profiles are really interesting.
Yeah. Cool. Madan, do you have any example of a company?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, we work with a lot of customers and partners. The one that comes to mind recently, it's actually something that our CEO highlighted recently. It's a company called Simon Data. They focus on marketing, and their evolution to Simon.ai, which is basically a context personalization for marketers at scale. The reason I'm highlighting that is, look, as much as there is so much disruption about reimagining, how you do marketing or finance or, vertical AI or physical AI, being able to transform your expertise to something relevant is equally important. And that also gives you hope that expertise today, can be transformed to expertise in the Gen AI era. And as someone else said, like it's really about velocity, but both the scale and speed of diffusion. I think that's what I think Gen AI has given us is being able to immediately kind of make all this awesomeness from product through Gen AI be available to a lot more customers than ever before, but also at the same depth of customization and personalization. That is unique. Like we didn't have that, right? Like deeply customized marketer persona experiences was hard to get at scale. Now you don't have to sacrifice one for the other. Customization and scale is possible.
Mhm. Jeremy.
I would just say one of the funny trends that I feel like we've been seeing in a lot of these vertical voice deals. I mean, I did one in the healthcare space recently, is almost the cartoonization of the founder. Like, because the buyer is just as confused as the VCs are as to why they're supposed to pick one of the 20. I mean, it's just so funny to literally see the founders like dressing up in the clothes or like, just taking on the identity of, I did something in healthcare where the founder was ex Carbon Health. And it was, I tell the story of Carbon Health. I mean, Jacob, I know you guys are investors in a construction tech company where if you go on LinkedIn, the founder's literally wearing a construction hat. Like I don't think the VCs have the answer, but the funny thing is I don't think the customers have the answer either. And therefore people are just trying strange hacks to get attention. And it's just I don't even know what the right word is. It's like cosplaying, professional almost.
Does it work? I mean, how far do those things take you?
I think it allows you to get to the first inning. Like I feel like the odd thing here is that we actually had this is a bizarre conversation to have at a board meeting at a medical scribe company, but we were actually talking about, where do you allocate engineering resources? And, we had a legitimate conversation is because the foundation model improvement is going to have such a big effect on the company, the marginal hours spent on eking out marginal gains before the next model drops is less important than changing possibly the underlying infrastructure. So therefore, it's almost like the product has to work, but the way to get in the conversation is to have, be known as the thing. And I think if you are the product doesn't work, eventually it catches up to you. But, it's amazing to watch how so many of the winners have sold ahead of the product capabilities. And yeah, that goes against a lot of traditional speak.
Yes and no. I feel like some big enterprises have vaporware conferences where they announce a lot of stuff on stage and then nothing actually comes of it because they need stuff to announce. So that's been going on, at least from my experience, the entire time I've been in tech. But I think that potentially the time horizon by which you can then build it, because people are building a lot faster, is shortened. So you're a little bit less at risk. But although I don't know if companies ever were that at risk, because I think on the enterprise, people just move quite slow anyways. So by the time they're actually ready to implement it, the product is probably there. But yeah, how much do you think of a founder as, I've been asked this actually quite frequently, and I'm curious to get all of your takes of like the founder as the sort of, and you kind of mentioned this, Jeremy, and Jacob, you in other ways, the founder as sort of a moat in terms of like their distribution, their voice in the market. There's obviously some very interesting marketing tactics going on with some companies out there that I'm sure we've all seen. But how much does the founder's reach and distribution matter to you in terms of moat, and how defensible is that from where you all sit?
I mean, I think somebody wrote a really good article on it. The levered beta article, which was basically like, because there's a whole lot of folks just sitting on top of ChatGPT, the founders network and the founders buzz starts the conversation. I mean, basically the point of this article was it's okay to get a little bit ahead of the model capabilities, but you also have to know, how quickly the model's going to improve. So if you're claiming it's going to do something that it can't do for 3 years, and you're sitting out there making claims, that's going to catch up to you. So yeah, I think we're all seeing levels of marketing, and I think the you have to be in the middle. If you don't make the claims, people don't know who you are. But if you make things that are so over the top and disprovable, like, the buyer's going to react.
Yeah, I mean, I think great founding teams are a huge part of early defensibility, right? If I think about what a lot of these best AI apps have done, is I think of them as kind of they're partners to the C-suite or functional leaders of these companies, and they're partners both in realizing whatever the capabilities of these models are today, but also these companies are picking partners to basically go on this 5-10 year journey that is going to be this massive improvement in models over that time, and so I think part of this is the company and the founders having this trusted brand such that it's a big decision for a hospital exec or a law firm exec or a bank exec to say, hey, this is the partner we're going to work with, and they're going to help me navigate this all. And obviously you don't want to fall behind your competitors in doing that. And so I think the way that teams can build that kind of trust, to the extent they can do that with brand equity they built around the company or the founding team, I think is hugely helpful to the businesses.
Yeah, I agree. I think with so much disruption happening almost every day, was talking to a founder the other day, and they were like, "Yeah, we got disrupted by, Nana Bananas or you name it, right? Something that the big model companies are working on." But what matters, I feel, is the trust element or their ability to adapt that the founding team can display and demonstrate and say, we are ready for disruption and we'll adapt and pivot. And so that comes from their ability to kind of show either in their experience or in lived experience in front of all the disruption, how they pivot and how they adjust and change their value prop. So absolutely, I think it has some equity and value.
I would say here, I mean, I think it defines of it's always been useful to be a thought leader in some space, whichever way you've done that. I think some of the earlier Gen Z founders are sort of redefining on how to do that. And sort of you see that even in media, traditional media sort of being upended by a lot of sort of new podcasts and new ways of talents across industries. And I think that just same thing is happening within technology as well, where people realize that, okay, maybe I don't have 20 years of experience selling in this industry. So how can I overcome that without getting that is becoming a thought leader in that space. And actually people are redefining, I think, more open on that. So I think it is an advantage. I think we talk, what's that balance between people working and doing that? And I think that's hard of how do you go do that? But I think we've seen in our portfolio, it's very clearly opened a lot of doors for people. I think especially in some harder verticals, we do some deep tech and space investments. And I think some of those industries with much longer sales cycles and development and just sort of research timelines as well, where staying top of mind in that conversation, because hey, it's going to take a little while to launch. You're not going to get 100 million ARR in 6 months. It's just not what's happening because you're building your rocket. And I think that can help people keep you top of mind and in that conversation. So I think it's good, but I think we always encourage, I don't know what the right time should be, but it should be a small percentage,
I always tell founders that ask me, do I need to be out there? I'm like, if it's authentic to you to be out there and you have something to say, then be out there. If it's not authentic to you to do marketing or stuff that is not your style, then it's going to come off as inauthentic. And so I think for every founder, they need to figure out what is their unique way of reaching their audience, whether that is being very out there, doing more targeted things, whatever that is, to sort of help you reach the people that you're actually trying to reach. And there's many ways to do that. But if it's inauthentic to the founder, you can just spot it so easily that it actually does a disservice versus actually helping the company. I want to switch gears a little bit to kind of the types of sort of moats and that you all are seeing and thinking about in terms of I'm seeing a lot of companies that are building kind of these orchestration layers on top of some of these systems of record across a bunch of different verticals and industries. I'm curious sort of how you all think about in this moment in time in this AI world of orchestration layers versus trying to be more of that kind of full stack product, and how you think that sort of plays out, what's defensible about an orchestration layer or not. I'm actually curious, Madan, for you to kick off, because Snowflake obviously sits kind of in the center of a lot of this.
Yeah, no, it's a really good question. At Snowflake, we are super aware that we are not, the source of the data. A lot of the systems of record, you think about a CRM or think about, a finance, SAP or a Workday. I mean, all these systems are outside of us. So we know that, we don't originate data, but we end up being kind of the destination of a lot of the gold layer data, as we'd like to call it. So we see it both ways, right? A lot of customers tell us, data is the fuel, and we understand that, and we advocate that for all things AI. And because of that, they want to keep all their application workflows, agentic, innovation as close as possible to data, because this is their asset, this is their product even. So what that means is we have to build connectors for everything, every system of record. But we also understand that like there'll be different, entry points. Every company that has any sort of systems of engagement or systems of record want to do the same thing. They don't want the data to be taken out. They want all the processing and the workflow to kind of happen in their user experience. So, and this is why things like the model context protocol or agent to agent protocol will be kind of the semantic, interchange, if you will, of the future. You have to participate in that. Like, so all the systems of record will compete to kind of have, their customers experience in their surface area. But at the same time, everybody knows that you'll have to match data. Like, if I'm a healthcare provider, I want workday data for getting information about people so I can understand, different dynamics. So we see that all the time. And so our point of view is, participate in both, right? Like it's too early to kind of have strong opinions on this will win or right, like optimize for optionality. That's our take, and making sure that we show up headless if need to be, and we show up with a great user experience if people want to operate on our surface area.
Makes sense. What's an opinion, you mentioned it so early, like what's an opinion that maybe you or Snowflake had a year ago that's changed on this, given how fast things are naturally changing right now?
I think the rate at which things are moving into production, that definitely has changed, right? Like, last year was a lot of POCs, tire kicking. Now we have material regulated industry use cases, right? Like, they're, these are at scale. These have real meaningful impact on the bottom line, the top line, margin creation. So that's definitely a change. You'll see kind of all other vendors talking about that as well. And that's because there is a lot more durability on what to expect from the foundational labs, working on various models. And then there's also real clarity on where there are gains. There's a bunch of use cases. For example, I run our support engineering team. So the support space is ripe for efficiencies and efficiency gain. There's so many players there, and I talk to a bunch of the startups in this space to see how I can create efficiency. So that's a no-brainer, right? Like this is kind of the next step in creating some autonomous AI-based workflows that will create a lot more, yeah, improvements in customer experience, case deflection, you name it, right? Like so, these are problems that we've known. Again, the combination of scale, accuracy, and speed allows us to kind of get faster into these sort of production modes. So I would say that would be the biggest thing. And I do think like, especially in enterprise, arguably, as you talked about, even though things are slow, they're very sticky, right? Once they kind of move into this more, like they build an entire periphery of, gestures in the enterprise that are fine-tuned to that particular process or business workflow. So we're seeing that, right? Like very sticky workflows starting to happen on AI.
Have you brought in a new tool for your team on the support side?
Oh yeah, yeah. We talked to all the vendors. We built our own on top of Snowflake Cortex. Because obviously a lot of our own we run on Snowflake ourselves. We also use all the coding agents that's out there. The cursors of the world. GitHub Copilot and all of that. Tremendous productivity gains. I mean, of course, as someone said in the previous podcast, you have to be in the edge of learning. To be able to have the license and the right to say, hey, this is material and this is not as material. So yeah, so absolutely, we all the way up to our CEO are big users of pretty much all the AI tools out there.
Cool. Anyone else have any thoughts on sort of that orchestration layer and how you think about defensibility there?
It's just interesting to know. I mean, compare and contrast. I feel like in the last couple months, two hot categories kind of that fall under there are the ERP replacement and then what's going on with everything and modules of the EHR. And I don't know, a year, I mean, right now, everyone makes fun of that how many rounds can happen in ERP replacement. But just even conceptually, if you had asked me a year ago, like what's the probability of people will be willing to rip and replace their ERP versus their CRM versus their EHR, it would not have been obvious to me that the clear answer was rip and replace your ERP. I'm intrigued by that and how that seems to differ. I mean, in healthcare, a lot of people have made the assumption build scaffolding around the core system, bundle more, build yourself into the core system. Why in the ERP space, a lot of people made that same assumption, and then 2 or 3 businesses made the assumption rip and replace. I don't have a good perspective on why that seems to be happening differently in different core systems of record, but I think that's really interesting.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, I think those two markets are probably, maybe actually represent the difference in those opportunities, right? Where the nice thing about the ERP market is there's companies that are always growing into needing one for the first time, and so there's this whole greenfield to go into. Whereas in the HR space, most of the time, I mean, sometimes there's new practices that are started, but by government mandate, most people have something in place already. So I think the rip and replace in all these spaces, I think, is still hard. But in some of the other ones, there's new needs for system of records, which I think does create an opportunity.
Yeah.
Maybe the one additional point I would add is, there's a real push, especially in this sort of, data as a fuel for AI era, for minimizing data movement, right? Like obviously there is economic advantages for the vendors having systems of engagement, systems of record to kind of keep the data where it is. But also it's costly, it opens up the attack surface, accuracy goes down. So, even like if you look at, our announcements this week with Workday and Microsoft, a lot of this is bidirectional read-write access with, no data duplication or movement. That's becoming a real trend. There are open formats, industry standards, even in each vertical that's developing, because they realize that the moment you're moving, your access control is off the books, and you can't control accuracy or access to data. So that's again something that we are seeing. And my expectation is even in this rip and replace context, people are going to kind of worry a lot about governance of this data because, like I said, data is the product these days, and that kind of shows your differentiation with your competitors.
Anything else to add, Valerie?
Honestly, not really. I thought you were all answered.
All good. One other question I'd love to hear, particularly from the 3 investors here. When you think about kind of when founders are pitching you about, hey, here's our moat, here's like how we're defensible, here's how we're different from everyone else. What are some of the misconceptions that you've seen founders have around what makes like a true moat, or areas where you've kind of come out of that conversation a little more skeptical, where founders perceived something that maybe from where you sit was a little bit off?
I personally, I do think it's been changing over the last 6 months or so, but I think we here at NFX have always believed this, but that there's rarely a case you're really going to win because of that technical moat that goes there. I think everyone's, was doing the rounds earlier this year. Everyone's like laughing at like DocuSign and like, oh my God, how is this such a big company? Look, I can just like vibe code it in 20 seconds or whatever, goes on that. It's so easy. And the reality is, I think that's always often been the case for a lot of businesses. It's not, okay, maybe you couldn't do it in a week, but you could take a team and do it in 3 or 4 months. And the business didn't win because the product was impossible to copy. It didn't win just because no one else could go do that. Obviously, there's some examples of that, and there's different industries. And so I think people who are, we win because we're X and X the best at this. And I'm like, okay, well, maybe you're the best at that right now, but how's that really going to go and scale? And like, yeah, what is your distribution? I think under indexing on like how I'm really going to get go to market quickly. And if anything now, I think we prefer to work with teams who have a really good gauge and path and action plan and ambition, in their go to market. And I think, before that, you'd have longer to grow into that because you would need to build the technology and it'd have longer to build the technology before someone else could build it. And I think now I'm like, as soon as this goes out in public, someone could copy it. So, how are you going to win?
Yeah, that quote that we know we've all seen, like first time founders think about product, second time founders think about distribution. I think the distribution matters so much more now than I would argue it always mattered, but people didn't acknowledge it. But I think it matters so much in the early days too, much earlier to your point than maybe it used to.
And I do think it always mattered, but I think people's bias or personal ego would go, well, we won because we are the smartest people in the room and we have the best ever technology. It's like, it's a nicer way to say that than to be like, I'm really good at sales. I don't know reasons those are so important. I'm an engineer by background. I think I see Matt shake his head. It's really easy for engineers to be like, I just won because I'm so good at coding. And now that's kind of ripped away. You're like, oh wait, a lot of people Claude's really good, for a lot of people. So wait, you actually got to have to own into, I'm actually quite good at sales as well,
Jacob, I saw you laughing. What I feel like you have maybe a good anecdote here.
No, I mean, obviously a lot of that I think really resonates, and I feel like, look, the reality is in the early days of these businesses, I think getting to scale and distribution is so important. And usually, what I look for is, okay, when this business is at scale, is there an interesting way to, to build some products on top of that or defensibility on top of that? And I think at the stage where we look, you're never going to know exactly what that is, but it's kind of at least some ideas of where you might go. And obviously, these businesses, it's AI, everything changes every month. Like these unfold quite quickly. But the feeling that, God, if this business really can do what they say they're going to do over the next few years, that leaves them in a really interesting position to go build this out further. But I don't think it's ever like a perfect plan for 5 years that is then executed exactly to that plan, at least in my experience.
Mm-hmm.
I would just add, it's so interesting how rare true data network effects are. Like when we look at our companies, truly our only AI companies that have this is Forder and Socure, which are identity and fraud prevention, and that's true machine learning. That's not foundation model based reasoning. And it's just interesting that those were businesses we invested in 2016 and 2017, and everyone talks about data network effects. And I can't honestly say in the LLM era, I feel like we have good examples of that. The two canonical examples I would cite are almost pre-LLM. So yeah.
Does anyone have an example of one in the last 2 years?
I mean, I would say, just, as the data hyperscaler, that Snowflake is, we have seen several data clouds even, not just data network. If you think financial services, Snowflake is the distribution standard for a lot of the regulatory data, right? Companies close their book with us. And then monetize, right? Especially downstream distribution. But, I don't know if, AI made it faster or easier, especially with the scale and speed of diffusion. But what strikes me is the ability to kind of tap into that, right? Like basically, when you are thinking about, differentiating or creating defensibility, how well are you leveraging the ecosystem to create the network effects, right? So it's not just your product, as you said. It is, of course, the distribution, which is a monetization potential. But are we, creating friends who can sell the product where we are not present? I think that's key. So in an intentional ecosystem play, I think about a company like Glean, how embedded they are with all the systems of record, and being able to kind of go create, network effects. So, when you use Glean, you'll immediately feel the sense that like, oh, this is connected to pretty much everything in my enterprise, specific to me. And so I think the importance of creating ecosystems as a foundation for creating data networks or any sort of network effects, I think is even more key.
How do you think about ecosystem as a moat? Like how defensible is ecosystem as a moat?
I
Anyone?
mean, it depends on how you pick it, right? Like you got to, both look at, disruptors and incumbents. There
Mhm.
are obviously, especially in enterprise, for each of the vertical, there are kind of the big, massive systems of record. You look at market share, you'll pretty much know.
Mhm.
There are top three players, and then there are a huge amount of disruptors coming. You have to kind of entertain both. And you have to be good in picking winners, and if you're not picking winners, be able to adapt faster and create network effects.
Has anyone seen a startup maybe in the last 2 to 3 years who's effective? Like, I guess Glean is maybe the last 5 years. Maybe my time horizons are off, but anyone maybe in the last 2 years, where a company has effectively leveraged the ecosystem for, driving distribution and a moat around them? Like, are there any good examples?
I mean, there's a few businesses, maybe Casetext, which was acquired in Intercom. Like if you peel back the layers of the grapefruit, or sorry, the onion, like what have these businesses done? I mean, in the case of Intercom, they had some existing customers on the old help desk product. So it's interesting to see you build a new customer support agent and suddenly you have some base of customers to sell them that product. I mean, Pylon, I think, is actually trying to do the same thing, kind of ground up. It's combining the help desk with the agent. But I feel like Intercom was interesting because they had an old base, at least to leverage. Casetext, that was a business that was ultimately acquired, but they had thousands of pre-existing customers using the old world product. So maybe those are two. We had thousands of native captive customers to go sell.
Yeah, they kind of disrupted themselves,
Yeah.
versus someone coming in and being the AI native, which is a risky move, right? It's like, are you cannibalizing your old product to move to the new one? Like, how do you make that decision? But I think there's a subset of companies who haven't made that decision and that pivot as quickly. And I think those companies are just kind of, in a really tough position if they don't make that call in the next 6 months, because they're just going to get disrupted by this next wave of companies. And so I think we're kind of on the precipice of I think a set of companies started in like, the 2021, 2022 era, who now these companies who have been started in 2024-ish can kind of leapfrog them, which is, such a risk. So is anyone else seeing that? Am I the only one? I'm seeing some heads nodding. Anyone else have anything to add to that? Nothing. Okay. Or
I was going to say, I mean, I think the fun thing about AI is that it all changes so fast that I'm sure there'll be a wave of companies started in a year or two that are doing things differently than the companies that were started a year or two ago, right? And I mean, even look to voice, right? Probably 2 years ago, a far less dominant modality than it is today, and there's probably all sorts of folks starting voice first takes on some of these spaces today.
Mhm. On that front, like how are there any new sort of shifts like that? Voice obviously is a new sort of paradigm. Any new sort of platform shifts that you're seeing that you're kind of excited about, that folks are building technology on, that AI has sort of opened up new greenfield opportunity? I mean, I think there's a lot of us are probably seeing the fact that a lot of companies are now able to go into the enterprise and capture not just the software spend, but the services spend as well. And that's like it creates an interesting opportunity to kind of redefine how technology is bought within an enterprise. But curious if there are other kind of macro shifts that you're seeing where you think in the next 6 to 12 months, you're excited to see some companies kind of take advantage of that opportunity. Because you could argue like the voice stuff actually probably came because of the move to mobile and everyone having a smartphone and basically a computer in your pocket, such that there's a lot more that you could do. So that shift, plus AI able to take advantage of that. But curious if there are other sort of major platform shifts or behaviors that you're seeing that you think are going to kind of blow up in the next 6 to 12 months.
I think for us, where I'm excited about, I think is in these sort of quote unquote legacy industries, but I would say they're typically non-software industries.
Mm.
I actually think why, I like an anecdote. So they all pretty much came online and sort of got software, and then nothing really was actually that 10x better for them. They're like, you know what? Am I really going to go rewrite this or do all this stuff again? Like, I'm online. I don't want to deal with this. And I think that's why. And they're like, mobile app era, cloud era, maybe they went on cloud, but like 2014 to 2022, like nothing really changed that much in manufacturing or logistics or anything like that in terms of really the technology platforms they use. And I think AI is really unlocking that sort of proof points of, hey, we can really be so much better. We can really like change what you're doing and really it's almost like they've sort of skipped a wave by like going out of it and are now kind of going to go adopt that. So I'm very bullish on those industries like finally be able to like actually have the like software spend and associated company value created in those industries that we haven't really seen in the last 10 years that much.
Yeah, I mean, to build on Valerie's point, I think, in addition to finally be able to provide the 10x value that some of these industries haven't had, you can also just, you don't need people necessarily to adopt a new piece of technology, right? You can be like, great, give us your emails or text or whatever you're using, and we can sit on top of that. And so I think the implementations are also a lot smoother. And one thing I'm super excited about, it might not be 6-12 months, but I do think there's a lot of really interesting stuff happening in the robotic space right now. And it feels like that space is really starting to get a ton of interesting progress. I mean, we've all seen the demo videos of like a hand moving like a grapefruit onto a plate or something, but like, I really do think we're like, it feels like we're starting to move from demo videos to real world use cases, which is really exciting.
What are you most excited for a robot to be able to do?
Oh, so many things. Definitely laundry, though. I mean, it's funny because everyone uses that as the demo, but it deeply resonates. Now that I've seen some of the demos actually work, it makes it that much more painful each time I have to do it.
I thought the perceptron model that came out today was very interesting. I mean, talk about a foundation model. You can now query the foundation model and ask, I mean, it's recognizing sequences of actions in, physical world space, which is not something you've been able to do before. I mean, you can ask it, what time did the player throw the basketball? I think that was what the demo was showing. And yeah, that's a big innovation on the computer vision and action side of things.
Yeah, I would say a couple of things from my point of view. Physical AI, as many called out here, that's interesting. It has real interesting applications that we weren't able to do it at scale and accuracy as before. But a couple of things for me that's interesting is just the access to huge corpuses of unstructured data. That most enterprises or many companies, we all create a whole bunch of data as we, activate our online presence that now suddenly can get accessed by AI, without a whole bunch of data management and create, super hyper personalization, right, on what we want to do. So that's really interesting. I mean, I almost feel like 90% of world's data that was not accessible became online thanks to AI. So that's going to unlock a whole bunch of distribution models and mechanisms. The second thing that I'm seeing is this business model disruption on per seat based businesses now getting into like, hey, it needs to be consumption based, like real margin compression and pressure to kind of create value to justify, like, even in the era of like, you pay for your perplexity license or whatever for at a per seat model. So there is an interesting change that's happening, especially as companies are trying to really differentiate themselves from others. There's a bunch of business model bravery that I'm starting to see happen. Those would be the two that I would call out.
I like that phrase, business model bravery. I might steal that. But that was going to be my next set of questions, was around pricing, and it's changing quite a bit at this point, and the way that people sort of value different products, how people price things from the per seat to the usage to the outcome, services plus software spend. How do you ensure, like when you're talking to companies, how do you make sure it doesn't just become a race to the bottom? How do you think about pricing as a lever for the businesses and these, these unique business models and how you're thinking about that when you're evaluating companies as something defensible, or if it works, then other people might just copy it. And, how do you think of pricing as that lever in the way that you're kind of evaluating companies and ensuring that, the value that they're delivering, they're actually capturing?
I mean, I think we're seeing a shift. We actually recently done some stuff on pricing here. Like, I think a shift more to the kind of outcome-based pricing that you're seeing. I think like most people want that more, especially as you drive to like tokens and even like you as an actual business making sure you make enough money on top of the margin of what it's creating. So kind of driving a kind of, I think we're seeing that hybrid, like kind of per seat, but also per outcome based, and usually a lower per seat versus fixed. So maybe that reinvents like, what does ARR mean here when you're not having everything all fixed and upfront and it's just going to be X ACV. But I think we're seeing that's probably something that's resonated with the folks that are buying these softwares quite now. And especially that also goes into the shift of the services where people are taking kind of some of that services-based revenue that you're effectively shifting to some of that services-based revenue model as well, how they get that.
Craziest pricing model you've seen, if any?
I mean, I think, again, to reflect back on kind of the business model bravery, like the trend that you're talking about, Kathleen, on, forward deployed engineers, right? Like effectively saying, I mean, that's, Palantir started it pre-Gen AI, but the idea behind that is, something that requires strategic patience, like to kind of deploy effectively engineers, part of your product team, for a couple of years to kind of completely, build custom software with an enterprise, and then, not think about repeatability, right? Like it kind of like defies all the logic that you would think about scale. But now that is becoming kind of such a pattern, right? Now Snowflake is obviously, doing this as well, but every model company is doing this because of the high cost of failure, frankly, right? From a customer point of view, and the ROI expectations, right? Like, a lot of people are saying, "Hey, what is the ROI?" I know this is a new normal. For me, I think the interesting thing there is, it's why this won't be a race to the bottom is because there is innovation happening, so fast that I think a lot of the enterprises have a hard time just keeping up, and they want real ROI. So when the people creating IP or margin are able to actually go deliver, closer to customers, it gives them a bit better ROI, but also more trust that like, hey, this is not some money that I'm spending on whatever the business model without any defined outcomes. There is basically more skin in the game from people creating margin.
Yeah, the number of pitches that I've seen where, how are you going to go to market? Well, we're going to do the forward deployed engineer model. And I'm like, what does that mean to you? Because I think people misuse it and kind of use it in many different contexts. And I have also spoken to some people from Palantir, some founders from Palantir who were pretty early. And I was like, why is everyone now becoming a forward deployed engineer company? And they were like, well, I think a lot of them missed the point that yes, they went and built this custom software, but they had a very specific strategy where then anything that they built was then input back into the core product. And so I think that only scales if you then, have that feedback loop back in. Otherwise, you're kind of glorified consulting firm, or I guess a more efficient consulting firm. But yeah, my take, I guess, on what I've seen there. What are you, maybe in the last couple minutes that we have together, it'd be interesting to hear kind of your predictions on kind of what the next 12 months looks like from the startup ecosystem versus these foundation models and areas that you think they might, they've obviously gone into a lot of these horizontal use cases. Any other horizontal use cases you think they might enter in the next 6 to 12 months? And then the opportunities that you see on some of these more vertical opportunities across the different ecosystem.
I've been waiting for somebody to do a good job automating Excel work. It was cool to see the Anthropic demo. It's clearly a bunch of newer startups are being funded to work on this problem. I've been trying the the kind of PLG style ones that let you tinker around. And I haven't found the ones that I've tried super useful for my use cases, but it seems that when you think about highest buckets of knowledge work, allowing any business person to use a spreadsheet seems like a high value task. And I haven't fully felt like I've found something that's good for me yet, but that's something I'm watching.
Here's the question on that. Does that live within Excel? Because Excel is so entrenched, or is it like a new take on, does it live somewhere else? Does it live in like a new form of Excel, or does it live within Excel and then just a layer on top? I think that's my big open question there.
I have the same question. I've seen 3 startups, each with 3 different opinions. One has they've got the GUI on top of Excel, one's just in Excel. It's interesting, right? I mean, if you make the analogy to law, there's a whole bunch of these contract editing tools, right? That they live on top of Word. They didn't actually build the UI. So you say in the lawyer case, people like that it lived on top of Word. But in the lawyer case, there was no general tool that could do it. The Excel case is a little bit different.
I mean, I would say from my point of view, what I'm looking forward to seeing is, in healthcare, right? Like there's a lot of physician burnout, that problem's not going away. We have less physicians, year over year, we have an aging population, at least in this country, certainly globally. I mean, it seems like a place where, if you can, eliminate or at least improve efficiencies, right? A lot of the inefficiencies, we can eliminate, but at least if we can make incremental change. And I think this is an amazing problem to kind of target AI. And I know a lot of the healthcare vertical AI companies are chipping at that, whether it is, transcripting, autonomously, what the doctor patient thinks within the boundary of, regulatory governance. But I really feel like that'll be beneficial, at least in the next year or so.
Yeah, I
think
think,
on
or go for it, please. All right, I'll go. I think finance and accounting and seems like a category that's pretty ripe with this next wave of models, and then also go to market. I'm not sure anyone has like quite cracked solutions there, but it seems like as the models keep getting better, certainly a really interesting area.
I think I've seen like 100+ AI marketing products in the last 2 years. I think it is interesting on that front. There's a lot more tooling out there, but then they're all, I think, going to converge. So the question is, who's going to be the winner?
Yeah, I think on my side, I'll say new thing. I think what I hope to see is, we invest across all industries, including consumer. And I think we really want to see people with kind of coming with new sort of paradigms of how we should interact and, work with technology. I think a lot of things I often encourage people to say, and that's, I think, where the younger founders have an advantage because they've effectively grown up with AI. So they're looking at the world from this sort of AI first principle of like, okay, well, I have all this thing. How am I going to build this? Where sometimes kind of more entrenched or experienced founders will kind of look at it just like the marginal improvement from where we are already. So I think I really want to see things that hopefully are actually just like a real step change in the difference of how we use technology versus just, a little bit faster way than we do it already.
Yeah, I agree with that, Valerie. The incremental versus the step change is, I think, excited for the next, hopefully 6-12 months to see more of that. I think that concludes our panel. Thank you all. Very insightful. I'll turn it over to Julia to close it out.
Phenomenal panel. Thank you so much. We actually have one question from the community, which is super interesting and curious to hear your thoughts. What blind spots would you say today's AI native startups can see it? Kathleen, let's start with you.
Oh, what can't they see? I mean, I don't know. The startups can't see a lot of things because they're so early and moving so fast. I think that's a good question. I think generally they can't see. I think everything is just moving very quickly, and so sometimes it's like you feel like you get there and then things change, and so I think they can't see what the future teams look like. I think the way that companies are being built right now are pretty different than they were even 6 to 12 months ago. And so I think we're still in the early days of like, who is the team that you need? And I think some of these functions that used to be kind of more standalone roles are actually getting more integrated. So on the go-to-market side, it's like you had sales, marketing, and customer success as pretty distinct teams. And I think going forward, you might have more generalist people who can actually use the tooling and coordinate across all those things, because it never actually made sense to me that you had all these different teams with different tools and systems when it was one record of people across that. So I think maybe the way that they build their company internally is actually going to probably change. And I'm not sure that we know what that's actually going to look like.
Yeah, I would agree with that. In fact, I think, Kathleen, I think the Clay folks called it the GTM engineer of the future, right? Which is blurring of the various functions. And it's also a new profile of people coming out of school these days, right? Like very savvy. You can call them AI, bilingual in some ways. And, they don't process information in the same way that perhaps, many of us in the panel do. So I think, just thinking about the workforce of the future, I think is not just from a go-to-market point of view, but across the company that you want to build is going to be very interesting.
Valerie, Jacob, Jeremy, what are your thoughts?
Yeah, the only thing I'd add is I think I think the reality is that everybody has blind spots in this current wave. Things are just moving so fast, and so I don't think anyone quite knows what the model capabilities will be in 6-12 months, what the org of the future is, and so there's given that there's not an answer out there. I think the ability to just be really adaptable and move quickly and change things as new information comes up. But the fact that there are blind spots is certainly not a problem. I think we're all operating with them to some extent.
Yeah, I think that's what I encourage people. It's like you're always going to have, there will always be blind spots. I mean, yeah, be on top of stuff, understand, where your market is. I think now, sometimes you go like, oh, go heads down. I don't really care what other people are building. I think actually in this market of people building so quickly, it is actually good to really understand where other people are in that build cycle. I've talked to some companies and they don't know half of the companies in this space. And so I think that's helpful when you're thinking about go to market, and just like, again, you can use AI to help you be up to speed with what's happening. But yeah, know that there's blind spots. That's not a negative thing. Just like be a scholar, of your industry.
Just be able to adopt to the foundation models. I think we're all watching what they can do, the speed at which they can get better, and just so interesting.
Thank you so much again. And that wraps up our Agentic Distribution Summit. Thank you for the incredible speakers, panelists, demo leaders, and all of you watching. And we'll be back on October 23rd with AI practice sessions. You can actually book one-on-one sessions, just consultation and mentorship programs on our marketplace. Unfortunately, not with all of the panelists that you are currently seeing on the show, but very hopeful that you'll create a profile. And yeah, see you soon. Thank you so much.